Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
When did a gut feeling save your life? Horror stories from Reddit. Episode 2. Maybe it saved my life, but it mostly in fact saved me from a car accident. Preface: I have bad luck in an odd way. I'm not superstitious, but for example I have bet on black 15 times in a row, increasing my bet, and had it bet red, plus one green, 15 times in a row. This is amongst many other stories, but really, bad luck. Story: less than 1 week ago, nearly behind my local grocery store is a street, leading to a light, leading remarkably close to my home. It's a pain of a light to sit at. Sometimes it will skip your light. Sometimes you need to go straight, but the guy behind you is making a right and it's awful just waiting there for this slow light so everyone can get home. It's something I deal with, but it's really not too bad. Well, on this day I was driving down that not so busy street. And the light was green from 50 yards away. I'm making my way to the light, modest speed. My first thought was there's no way I make the light. I get within 25 yards and I'm starting to realize I'm going to make the light. Honestly, this gets me. I'm like, praise this day, I just saved 4 minutes of my life by strolling through this long green like I own the road. Then, some anxiety-riddled good vibe ruining thought occurs to me. What if I get so full of myself driving through the Hail Mary of green lights and someone pulls in front of me? So, I cut my speed a little. I'm going to cruise through the intersection. And somebody is running the red light. We both slam on the brakes and miss collision by a few feet. I was followed by pretty amazed of myself for calling it. As a footnote, the anxiety from the near accident ruined the rest of my day.
I decided to waste time before heading home since I skipped out on work at the time and went to a plaza near where I used to work. I stopped at a couple stores before hitting a party city. It was near Halloween time, so I wanted to see what they had out. But mind you, the area I was in was completely unsafe. It was known for a bit of human trafficking activity. I'm a 20-year-old female who is 5 feet 0 inches and weighs about 110 pounds. I'm quite small, but I thought I'd be okay just checking the store out because the other two I went to were fine, and I didn't get any weird vibes from them. So, I parked my car at the end of the parking lot in front of the store, closest to the road. It was all I could get. I went in and just started to look around. There was a couple families, so I felt fine. Up until I went down an aisle near the front and saw a man on the phone who was looking very uninterested at the thing he was gazing at with another lady. He glanced at me and wouldn't stop looking at me. He spoke Spanish, so I couldn't make out what he was saying since my Spanish is pretty limited despite living in Arizona for so long. I started to feel uneasy, so I went toward the back into the next aisle, thinking my mind was just in overdrive since I was supposed to be at work, and that's where my parents thought I was. I finished looking down the aisle, and once I got to the back, the same lady that was with the man was already standing back there, as if she was waiting for me. I smiled at her and nodded my head, as I do in respect when I make eye contact with someone. I thought it would be an effective way to show her that I've seen her face enough to know what she looks like. So I went back down the aisle again and saw the man standing to the side near the front. I noticed a lady finishing checking out and rushed over behind her. The moment she walked out, I did too. And I hauled ass to my car and quickly started to drive away towards the freeway. I really felt uncomfortable, and I thought maybe I was being overdramatic. But the only reason I knew about the activity there was because a couple of weeks after the incident, there were reports of a few areas in Phoenix regarding human trafficking, and that area was one of them. So, never again.
A friend was having a party at a popular casino that has a resort. A few friends and I show up and we see a police officer and an employee enter the elevator as we enter the other one next to it. As soon as I saw that, I had a bad feeling. We get to the same floor and try to find the room that the party is held in. We see the police officer next to room, talking to the woman that filed the complaint, and just as a friend was about to knock on the door, I tell her aloud, "Nah, that's not the room, we're on the wrong floor." The police officer stopped us and asked what we were up to, and we told him we were visiting a friend but got the rooms mixed up. He let us go and turned out the room that we were about to go into was the room my friends were having the party in. Lots of underage people drinking, weeding, and complained about noise. People with weed on them got a citation and they're banned from going again. Dodged a bullet there. When I was quite young, 6 or so, I was mauled by a dog. I'm fairly sure that my split-second decision to run one way rather than the other saved me. The short story is my mom asked me to help bathe dogs. I went to round them up and the first dog I encountered happened to have some trauma regarding being restrained. He quickly got scared and became aggressive. I had originally come out the back door and circled around to the side of the house, where I encountered said dog. I had a choice between turning and running all the way to the back door away from the dog or cutting across the carport, which meant cutting close to the dog, to the side door. I chose to cut to the side door. The dog pinned me against the side door and began to maul my face. Unfortunately for me, the side door was locked, so I beat on it until my brother answered and kicked the dog off. I had reconstructive surgery and was fine. I think, however, that if I had tried to run to the back door, I would have been overtaken by the dog before I reached help. God knows what would have happened then. I likely would have been tackled by him in the backyard far enough away that it was possible no one would have heard me. I don't blame the dog, but I do occasionally wonder what might have happened that day if I had decided to take a different direction. R.I.P. stranger, I know it wasn't your fault. When I was in the army we spent 3 weeks in Panama for jungle training. The terrain down there is a nightmare, nothing but steep hills. You try to stick to the ridges if you can, but unfortunately they rarely run in the direction you're traveling. On our last day in the field, we were moving to set up an ambush when we came to the ridge of a hill, roughly 200 m from top to bottom, with about a 45-degree slope. We really should have rappelled down it, but we lacked the rope to do it properly. Instead, we start carefully picking our way down the hill, while carrying about 65 pounds of gear. About halfway down the hill, I slipped. Had that frantic moment where my arms are pinwheeling while I'm trying to catch my balance, but luckily I stumbled against this spindly little sapling of a tree, just a couple of feet tall. It was just barely big enough to stop my slide and let me regain my balance. While I'm doing that, I hear a guy at the top of the hill yell, "Rock," meaning he's just kicked a rock loose and it's now tumbling down the hill. I looked back but didn't see anything, so I shrugged and turned back to continue my journey down the hill. Okay, so this is the weird part. Even to this day I can't explain it. I'll just tell it the way I remember it, and let you draw your own conclusions. As I'm preparing to head down the hill, I swear I heard a little voice in the back of my head, "You know, you might just want to take another look up that hill." Okay. So, I turned to take another look, and this time I spotted the rock. It was about the size of a bowling ball, moving at a fairly good clip, and it must have just hit something and bounced because when I spotted it the rock was about 2 feet from my face, and zooming in for the kill. I think I reacted the way most people would. I screamed "shit" and tried to dive out of the way. I almost made it, smiley face. Damn thing clipped my elbow, and threw me straight back, and the only thing that stopped me was that same little spindly sapling I'd bumped into the first time. I thought I'd shattered my elbow, and I'm hollering like a stuck pig, but thankfully I was only badly bruised. The thing is, if I hadn't turned around for another look, that rock would have either snapped my neck, or thrown me down the hill to let gravity do the work. Either way, that little voice probably saved my life. And like I said, I still can't explain it. On the high school German club field trip, I was hanging with some of the other kids at a U-Bahn station, while they were poring over the map to decide where to go. Loudly. In English. Shortly before the trip, a Turkish exchange student wrote in every club member's yearbook, "Beware the Turks." I had lived overseas before, and knew exactly why. Grand arguments aside, I took the advice seriously. So, we're in the train station when I look around and see two guys in wife-beaters and baseball caps, smoking underground, watching us, and talking to themselves. They get up and walk towards us, while I'm telling the party to get moving. Sin sees American. I hate to dredge up old memories and make bold claims, but these guys were definitely doing the whole puffed-up chest, gangster approach. One of the girls turned and I could hear her excitedly say, "Yeah we are," before I jumped in. Neon, war send Canadian. Immediate posture change. Relaxed, joking, I didn't hear most of what they said but they offered us a smoke. I said no thanks and that we had to go, and literally pushed my classmates along. Were we in mortal danger? Probably not. It was a busy subway station, middle of the day, like 2005-ish, so the international scene was tense but not taken/President *Trump bad. But the only one who seemed to understand was the teacher when I recounted it later, uneasy face. My mom and grandma were out shopping together for groceries. Before I get into this story, you should know my mom is very unconfrontational. She's never very rude or direct with anyone. So, they came out of the store and were loading all their bags into their car. My grandma had something, I don't remember what, that she was trying to put in her trunk, but it didn't fit. During this time, my mom noticed a man walking towards them. She told my grandma to hurry up, but this strange man kept getting closer. Eventually, my mom said it felt like something came over her, and she held her hand out and said, "Don't take one step closer towards me." Again, I know my mom, she would never do this unless she had to. I don't remember exactly what happened, but he went away eventually. She said she believes an angel was protecting her, but there's no proof of that, so Again, this isn't exactly what the question is asking, but I feel like it kind of ties into it. The wife had crashed her car. After a month she got an insurance payout, and after a brief search she found, about 100 kilometers from our place, in Sydney, Australia. I wasn't keen. The weather forecast was for storms, quite strong ones apparently. But she was insistent. Which is a tale for another day. So, we drove down to Sydney. Now, the seller was a guy who just closed his car yard down and had just a few vehicles to sell, keeping them at home. The wife looked at the vehicle, liked it a lot, took it for a short drive, all good. While that was going on, and the drawing up of paperwork, a few people were coming out and covering their cars with thick blankets. A severe storm warning with large hail had been issued. I thought I'd better move my car under a tree and hopefully avoid the worst of it. I love my car and didn't want it to be written off due to hail damage, as had happened to people I know. So, I get to it just as the rain truly begins to bucket down, massive amounts. And then the wind starts thrashing the trees, really thrashing them. And I realize the tree I'm parked under, which had multiple trunks, 4 or 5, is rocking to and fro. And my gut instinct said, hail or not, you can't stay here. So, I rolled my car forward about 4 meters and looked in my rear vision mirror, in time to see the tree crash on the road behind me. Close enough to put a large scratch near the petrol cap, but no other damage. And 10 meters in front of me, I turned around to see an enormous tree had crashed right across the road, pulling down power lines. When I went back to pick up the wife, the car salesman's garage had a tree go through it, crushing 2 of their cars, though not the one she was buying. We drove home, picking it up after the money was sorted in a few days, and on the way the suburbs were a mess. The damage was crazy. Turns out 2 supercells had met over the city and where we were was literally ground zero, could not have been in a worse place. So, in conclusion, I was extremely glad I listened to my gut. People who lived across the road and saw the tree fall were convinced I was under it and were about to call emergency services. I never win a lottery or a big prize, but I love my grandkids, the lights in my life, and sometimes I get lucky in other ways. Below is a link to a local paper that reports just how big it was. I was a mechanic on the E3 Awakes and I'm a big guy, 6 feet 7 inches, and some of the spaces we had to work in weren't excessively big. This one day we're changing out an APU accumulator, to save techno-able, it's what helps the plane power itself up. I don't remember exactly, this was years ago. We do everything by book because this is an essential part of the plane. Gotta do it right. We tighten down, check our work, and now we have to turn it on. I'm laying right next to this thing that's nearly as big as I am in a space about the size of a big coffin. I get this little voice in my head that says, move back, so I do. I scooch all the way back so I can still see the gauges and parts, but I'm out of the line of fire. We start power, APU winds up like hydro does. Boom! The accumulator exploded, the end cap shot off and sprays fluid at 2,850 psi in a nice circular radius. Somehow I flip around and launch myself towards the door, and wind up on my sergeant. I'm okay, power gets shut off, and we have to clean up and do the job all over again. Apparently the snap ring that kept the end cap on was defective or some tough. Ah well, I'm not dead or wounded, so everything wound up Gucci. It was early in the morning at the Haight in San Francisco, and my wife and I were window shopping as none of the stores were open yet. My wife was in a miniskirt. I had a bad feeling and looked to my right. There were 3 thugs that looked like they were looking for trouble headed our way. I told my wife to find a shop and get inside now. She asked me why, but she could tell by the look on my face that she needed to scoot. I maintained a distance between her and myself as she ducked into a coffee shop. I go straight to the spot where the coffee is brewing. A second later, from the entry point, one of the punks shouted something about thinking I was safe is a mistake. They kept going, and everyone in the coffee shop was wondering what was going on. Nobody said it to us, but that was the end of it. Late one evening, I was driving home on a dark parkway with no streetlights. After driving several miles with lights only supporting my headlights and a few other cars, the cars were exiting the parkway one by one, and the night became even more grave. With only a few more miles left till my exit, there was only one car left behind me. Me and the other car. Okay, share the road, right? My exit appears, I turn on my signal because I still have driving etiquette. Seconds later, the other car also signals and exits behind me. Okay, what a coincidence. We must live in the same area. Big neighborhood with houses, townhouses, apartments, and condominiums. Turn after turn, it keeps following me into now my neighborhood. Oh wow, I am freaking out now. I don't know what to do, not a single soul outside. I turn into my street, and it's still behind me. WTF do I do? Do I call the police officers? My gut feeling told me to not park into my driveway because there is no time for me to run into the house, nor would it be wise to actually give away the actual house I live in. So, I drove past my house, and before I turned at the end of the street, I looked at the rear mirror and the car had parked into a driveway. Holy stuff, are they going to wait for me? I need to call a friend and go somewhere else. What about my family who's already in the house sleeping? I wait a bit and look exactly at which house the car parked at. I found out it was my neighbor. Relieved and laughing at myself, I circle the block and go back to my own freaking house and call it a night. Till this day though, I am still proud that I played it safe than be sorry had it gone south. I'm a volunteer firefighter. We were at a house fire, had just evacuated the house of all personnel due to worsening conditions inside. We were moving to a surround and drown defense. I was at the front door with my partner staffing the hose line. I told her to pack up, put on our SCBA gear, despite almost everyone else not wearing theirs. In fact, I said, "I don't like the way this is going." To her something felt off to me. She was still packing up when there was some kind of an explosion, likely smoke. Not really sure. Definitely wasn't a backdraft though. I remember hearing a distinct woof noise and seeing a wall of orange coming at me, then looking up at the sky. It blew me out the door, off the stairs and onto the ground. Luckily stepped off the stairs to pack up, so she was fine too. If I hadn't have packed up when I did, I would have likely been dead, or horrifically injured. It happened 4 years ago maybe. It's still crazy to think about it. 12. I was on a run in a city. I always ran on the same route, and I knew the traffic lights well. I knew how long the lights would last, and if there were no cars coming I knew when it was safe to go even if the walk sign wasn't up. At this particular intersection, there was one direction the cars would come from, and you couldn't see the cars until they were pretty close because there was a curve with some trees right before the light. One time I was on my run, and it was a wonderful time to run across. I had plenty of time, the direction with the curve had a red light and would have a red light for a while, there were no cars coming and I was about to run across the road like I often did. But as I was taking my first step, a voice in my head said, "No," in a way that kind of startled me and I jumped back to the sidewalk. As I jumped back, a car came zooming around the bend and sped right through the red light and would hit me right where I was going to be running. The whole thing shook me up and the adrenaline from that made me run much faster. It also made me extra careful on my runs from then on. When I was 18 I was sitting at an intersection with my best friend. The intersection was at the bottom of an exceptionally large hill. Tractor trailers carrying cut-down trees for the nearby paper mills use frequently went down this hill. Music blasting, sitting at the red light. The intersection felt really empty for some reason and my gut tightened up. I looked in my rearview mirror to see one of those trailers hauling ass and coming in hot. I panicked and drove my car into the oncoming traffic lane to the left with no time to spare. He blew through the red light, made it half a mile down the road and went off the road. He was asleep at the wheel. He would have absolutely destroyed us. We were in a small geoprism. I once had to take a train from Paris to Germany early in the morning. As a Parisian, I know that quite a few places here can be unsure, including the train station I was at. I was printing my train ticket at a machine in a desert floor at 7 a.m., my phone in hand, and a weird guy approached me, asking what time it was. He reeked alcohol and seemed to be unstable and possibly on drugs. I put my phone in my other hand, further from him, and told him what time it was while scowling and not keeping my eyes off his. He left. I quickly printed my ticket, went to the other floor. When I arrived at the escalator, I saw him trying to violently steal some guy's bag off his shoulder while the poor man was waiting for his croissant at the station's bakery. I was quite heavily involved in a local clubbing scene and there had been a few organized illegal outdoor events, tents and music in a field in the middle of nowhere. Most people knew each other, and they generally went off okay. A new event was arranged and lots of local DJs were booked to play in some random field at the back of an abandoned steel works. I'd planned to go and just get hammered. It was on all day and night, so we headed over quite early and when we turned out not many people were there. The DJ equipment was set up in a tiny bunker with a few people standing around it. The day passed, and darkness started to fall, and more people showed up. Something just didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, I just knew I had to leave. So, I did. The location was about a mile away from a really rough town and the locals heard about the event and turned up in gangs. They attacked the entire party, leaving many unconscious and stolen thousands of pounds worth of DJ equipment, alcohol, drugs, money, phones, etc. It was likened to a death camp of bodies lying all over the place. Fortunately, nobody died. Went to the house party of a girl I had mutual friends with, and she had moved in with a guy in his late 20s, we were all 18/19/20 and in college. Something about him gave me the creeps. He was nice and friendly and never did anything that would make him seem creepy, but he really freaked me out. At one point he suggested doing shots and broke out the Grey Goose, which, in college, is expensive alcohol. I dumped mine and filled the glass with water when the guy went into the living room. He kept suggesting shots and everyone else was on board, but I kept dumping mine. He tried to hang and get me to talk to him, but I kept brushing him off and eventually he moved on to talking to the other redhead there. Eventually I just snuck away from the party. The other girl I knew was leaving, so I booked it out of there with her. Find out the next day that the other redhead passed out in the living room. He took her to his room and raped her. The girl who moved in with the guy moved out a month later. Initially she didn't believe the girl, but it became obvious after some more time that he was bad. Edit. This is something I, unfortunately, still think about almost daily. I drive past the house on the way to my workout class. I narrowly avoided becoming an unfortunate accidental death during training. I was an Army reservist for a few years during high school and university. Decent money, let me have a part-time job with some good skill building, and solid full-time employment during my summers. Between high school and university, I took a gap year of full-time work to build up tuition money, and I spent most of that year working at a training center in Western Canada. My job was to be an opposing force to train people headed overseas to Afghanistan. That day, we'd headed out to an area to dig some hidey holes and wait to stage an ambush. Pretty standard for us. I dug a shallow trench and camouflaged it, then laid down in it to wait out the hour or so we expected to be there. After a while in the summer sun, I could hear a vehicle approaching. I didn't want to give away my position early, so I just stayed down. As the engine sounds grew louder, I finally decided that I had to know what was going on, even if I compromised the ambush. I sat up and turned around in time to see the front wheels enter my little trench right where my head had been. I'm fairly sure that would have crushed me. I'm glad I decided not to keep hiding. God knows how much worse my face would look after getting driven over. When I was in my early 20s, my grandmother became ill with cancer. I had moved across the country a few years prior, but she had basically raised me, and I wasn't doing anything in my new city except waiting tables, so I moved back to help take care of her. She was receiving hospice care pretty quickly during my stay, and there was often a night nurse that would come in so I could get some sleep. I would also sometimes use these nights to meet up with a man I had waited tables with before I had moved away. We had run into one another one day when I was out getting groceries, made a date, and things got pretty hot and heavy right away. We were both in some emotional turmoil. He was stuck living with an ex because he couldn't afford a place on his own, and it was nice to just have some fun. After a day of reading to my grandmother, cooking food she couldn't eat, giving her meds, bathing her, missing her even though she was technically still with me, it was good to forget for a little bit. For obvious reasons, we couldn't really meet at his place or my place, so we had to get creative. For some reason I don't remember, I had my mom's car that night, a convertible red Miata. It was late fall and still warm, and we decided to go for a drive, out an old highway away from the city, and look for a place to park. The road was very windy and dark without a lot of shoulders. We eventually settled on an empty gravel parking lot next to a church. There was one light attached to the building that illuminated some of the parking lot and a little bit of the big field behind the church. I parked the car, the top was down to give us more room, and we proceeded to go after it like a couple of high school kids. Thank goodness that car was too small to get serious, no real back seat to get into. We were deep into each other, but something made me break away and look out into the field. I couldn't see anything, it was pitch black beyond the circle of light provided by that one bulb. Kissing again, but I kept feeling drawn to that field. I looked again, and this time I definitely saw something. I nudged the guy I was with. Do you see that? He looked, and the shape of a man became distinguishable in the shadows of the field. No shirt, running all hunched and low to the ground, zigzagging back and forth but definitely heading toward us. And laughing. By some miracle I had left the keys in the ignition. I started in the car, threw it in reverse, and peeled out of the parking lot, spitting gravel everywhere. The shirtless guy chased us down the road, sprinting, arms pumping, trying to catch us even though there was no way. We lost him going around a curve. We didn't say anything the whole way back to the city, and things were weird between us afterwards. He decided to try and work it out with his ex. My grandma passed a few weeks later, and I ended up back out west. I was like 13, watching TV, pressure washer hissing in the kitchen one corner away from me, pressure washer stops hissing, finally some quiet to listen to the TV undisturbed, but it's weird, I get up to go check, it didn't even occur to me that perhaps the gas has gone off and the thing stopped boiling, that would be relatively safe, right? So, I go take a look, just before rounding the corner I stop and start thinking what could I do to stay safe? What if Jay go grab my cardboard riot shield I built and use it to protect myself as I approach the pressure cooker? As I am thinking this, the thing explodes and covers the kitchen in hot water. I would probably not have died because it was just the rapture disc exploded, not the whole pot, but I would probably have had an odd time with the boiling water explosion deal, would have probably been unpleasant.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.